Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So we're obviously at my home office for this one, and what we're going to do in this episode is go over my 5 favorite turbo systems that I've ever built or been a part of building. So a little bit of my background. I've been doing automotive welding and fabrication, specifically race fabrication and race turbo system fabrication for around the past decade. So I started out due to the necessity of having to learn how to weld and fabricate for the sake of my own racing endeavors, and that transitioned from doing it for myself to doing it as a hobby for other people to turning it into the business that I run today. And over the course of that time, I've built a number of what I think are pretty interesting turbo systems, or been involved in the building of interesting turbo systems. So what I've done is compiled a list of my 5 favorite turbo systems that I've built over the course of my career. And they're anything from street cars to crazy race cars and so on and so forth. And a lot of good memories, another really good trip down memory lane. So why don't I shut up about this portion of it, and let's go ahead and get into the turbo systems. So number 5 on this list is my friend Thomas's really clean, really cool streetcar Supra. You guys may recognize this as it was a build series in recent history, but my relationship with Thomas, it extends back a number of years, and I've built a number of turbo systems for him over the course of that time. I won't go over that whole history, but I'll talk about this turbo system and what makes it cool and what makes it special. So, Thomas is in the pursuit of perfection with his car. And in that pursuit, he's always changing up the direction he's going and what he wants to do with this car. And I think we finally nailed down the final iteration, and that may end up being true as time goes on or may not. But this is about the best that I can do for him, aside from going to like Inconel for the header or something like that. So what this setup is, it's a 321 stainless tri-Y billet collector 2JZ manifold, a 4-inch titanium downpipe with a recirculated TurboSmart 60mm electronic wastegate, and a Zona turbo of some sort. I don't know Zona's nomenclature all that well, but a really cool, really clean, really neat setup that's packed with cool new tech and something that is a really neat setup. And what you guys saw in the build series was taking it from the basic hot part setup that I built for him and taking that and building the rest of the turbo system from there. So that was the intercooler tubing, that was a titanium mid-pipe going to a titanium ETS exhaust. That was a bunch of other little ancillary items, but this turbo system with the perfectly sized turbo for streetcar duty, as well as all the neat stuff as far as the metals used are concerned, this will be a really cool, really fun streetcar for him, and one that he can do pretty much whatever he wants with. And I remembered when this car came in, as I hadn't ever seen the car prior to him bringing it for me to finish up this round of welding and fabrication work. But the car, there was almost no box unchecked on the list of what a perfect streetcar Supra would be. Whether it be the transmission, the diff, all the billet pieces, every little nuanced detail. And I remember getting the car in and just getting it on the lift and looking around and going, holy crap. All the detail work, even in places that you really would never be able to see or never be able to tell. No stone went unturned, and I was awestruck, for lack of a better explanation, about this. Now, the car's wrapped up, at least as far as my portion of it is concerned, aside from one bracket that I need to build for him as once the shop gets back together. But this, I don't know that I've been more excited for a streetcar Supra ever than I am with this one. And I can't wait to hear what it sounds like, see how much power he's able to make with it, and see exactly where he ends up going with it. And I really hope that I get the opportunity to hear and see it running, or even better would be to go for a ride in it, as this thing is going to hit like a sledgehammer when the turbo comes online. Moving to number 4 on the list, we have a turbo system that I haven't talked about a whole lot, but probably one of the craziest and one of the coolest ones that I've ever had the pleasure of being involved with is my good friend Don at Accelerated Performance, his big tire blue Supra, and the crazy big twin setup that we built for this thing. Now, this was built a number of years ago, and Don approached me one day with the idea of, hey, why don't we put twin 80mm turbos on the 2JZ? And initially I thought he was crazy, but then we sat and talked about it more and realized that between having an auto and a ton of nitrous, we could probably make just about any turbo system work. And he wanted to do something different and put, as far as we knew at that point in time, the biggest pair of true twin turbos that had ever been put on a Supra. So we set out from there and built this really cool, really crazy turbo system. We worked with Robert Young at Force Performance to get these twin 80mm turbos to put on this car, and then set forth and started moving from there. And I built him a pair of 321 stainless V-band turbo manifolds for it with twin, they were tile 60mm compressed air, compressed gas wastegates. We did a pretty neat Siamese exhaust, where what I mean by Siamese is the two portions, the two hood exit exhausts in this instance, they come together. We merged them and welded them together, so the two exhausts become one, and it had kind of a cool shape that almost looked like the number 8 that protruded through the hood. We did a big 5-inch cold side tube off of the air-to-water intercooler going into the throttle body. I think it was a giant Wilson throttle body, if I remember correctly, and going into a big intake manifold. Everything was just big and massive and crazy on this setup, and I had never seen anything like it before, and I don't think anybody had at that point in time. Don had everything coated and everything looked absolutely beautiful, and this was a really cool project to be involved with. He tried to use the car with this setup a few times, and the amount of nitrous that it took to get these turbos lit, it was a very, very fine line between having the car run and having the car melt down. And I think he ran into issues a couple of times with melting the car down, and realized that we could make this big twin setup work, but it's more feasible and more practical to run a big single. And I think I can't remember if he even still has this setup or not, but I think that he is going to run a big single Pro Mod style turbo on it moving forward from here. And we'll see more of this car in the near future. And I don't want to get into any more details other than that at this point in time. But it's a really cool car with a lot of history, and one of my really good friends, meaning Don, it's been his labor of love and the bane of his existence for a number of years, the same way that these projects end up being for all of us. A pretty cool thing, pretty cool experience to have the opportunity to work on this setup, and like I said, more to come with this car in the near future. Number 3, we have Dan's crazy twin turbo Nova. So Dan is a local friend and customer of mine, and this is when my friends Bob and Sean were working with me, and we took on the crazy project of building a Pro Mod style turbo system for Dan's streetcar Nova. Now Dan, at that point in time, and this is a number of years ago before sixes were common practice in racing, or in drag racing, as the classes have gotten so crazy fast now, Dan wanted a 6-second streetcar, something he could drive just about anywhere that he wanted to, that runs on ethanol, not methanol, or ran on ethanol, not methanol, and something that he could go and drag race one day and then drive to a car show or a Cars and Coffee the next day. And it's an LS powered car. I think it's 400 some teen-inch LS, a bunch of good components on the engine. I can't remember exactly what the engine or what all it's comprised of, but he wanted to really push to get a 6-second pass out of this car. And he had, they were twin 85 millimeter turbos, if I remember correctly, T4 frame. And he came to us with a list of necessities and a list of criteria that he wanted us to meet with this build, and we set off and started knocking it out, and quickly ran into clearance issues and fitment issues and everything else. At one point in time, and I'll get to the story in a minute, but we built just about everything hot side related and some cold side stuff for this car. And we built some pretty wild looking tube headers for it. Initially aluminum downpipes until one of them blew up. It looked like a bomb went off on the first radius of the bend coming out of the turbine outlet flange. At that point in time, switched them to stainless downpipes, and that has never been an issue since. When we were building this setup, just goes to show you have to dot your T's and cross your I's for all these things. We had this system, this turbo system, built pretty much completely. He came out, Dan came out to do either a once-over. He was coming to pick the car up and starts looking around it and everything. And he goes, "Hey, did you guys loosen the front suspension and kind of bounce the car up and down and check clearance between the turbos and the front tires?" And all of our faces probably turned ghost white. We went, "No, we didn't." So loosened it, bounced it, and sure enough, the tires were into the turbos, into turbo mounts and everything else. And that is the most defeated one of the most defeated times one of the times I felt the most defeated in my adult life. Dan, I just went and sat on the shop couch and contemplated what I was doing with my life at that point in time. And Dan came over and gave me kind of a dad pat on the back and took off. He took off and left the shop. And at that point in time, we only had one thing to do, and that was to pretty much dismantle what we had built and start from almost scratch and start building or start rebuilding what we had just done to get everything to clear. And thankfully, we were able to knock that out in a couple of days. And I say all that to pass the lesson on of do your due diligence and always check for clearance in as many ways as you possibly can. Otherwise, you'll end up in the situation that we were in, or I guess you could do the shady thing of just going, well, it is what it is, and good luck figuring that out. But that certainly isn't the right way to do it. But Dan had brought the car back, and I did a conversion from T4 flanges on the headers to V-bands as he swapped over to tile housings on it. And after a long, arduous battle with bottom sevens, he was finally able to get his 6-second pass. And now we're talking about doing something a little bit crazier with the car moving forward, but let's go ahead and watch the clip of his 6-second pass now, as it was a long, hard-fought battle, and he was finally able to do it. So I can't remember if it was before or after the 6-second pass, but Bob and I actually went out to Maryland with Dan to race World Cup with this car. And that's a whole nother good story in and of itself. But long story short, the day before Bob and I got there, Dan absolutely murdered the ring and pinion in this car. And he ended up next daying a whole new third member and realized that it was incorrect. I forget if it was the spline count or something along those lines. Something was wrong with it where it was essentially not usable for his combo. So we sat and talked about it and wargamed a little bit and finally said, screw it, what do we have to lose? Let's take it apart and see what we can't hodgepodge Frankenstein together. And networking is important. I talked to my friend Joe at Tempest Racing, who you guys may be familiar with, but we ended up finding a machine shop to have some bits of the diff or the ring and pinion turned down. Our buddy Miles from Virginia, he set the rear end up. I forget if we patterned it or not, or just did it via feel. But after a mad dash and a mad scramble, ended up back in the lanes after, I think it was a day or so of getting all this back together. And the outing didn't go great. I don't think we really went many rounds or anything like that. But just the fact that when you are essentially down and out, and then have the opportunity to fix the car and have that mad dash, mad scramble, and see the fruits of that labor as a pass comes to fruition afterwards, that's a massive victory and a pretty cool thing. And now it's a good memory we can all look back upon and laugh about and reminisce and smile about. Number 2, we have a car that is very well known to you guys if you've been around the channel for any period of time, and that is actually my Supra. And I didn't include this car on the list to kind of pat myself on the back or pat my ego or anything like that, but I put it on this list because it is one of my favorite turbo systems that I've ever made, and specifically this ProMod turbo system that is on the car currently. So rewinding back to the end of 2016 when the car was still an 80 millimeter 6-speed car. And the end of that season, I broke the V160, the factory 6-speed transmission that was in it. And at that point in time, I was at a fork in the road. Either fix the V160 and keep 6-speed racing, or put an automatic in the car and go down that route. Now that's the route that I opted to go down. And actually in the process of building that big twin setup for Dawn Supra, I got the 94 millimeter turbo that is on my car currently. Now initially I had the intent to sell that turbo and use the proceeds from that sale to go towards would have been at that point in time a Precision 8685 with a V-band turbine housing, and set it up to do some class racing, smaller turbo, as that turbo is more than sufficient. That turbo being the 8685 is more than sufficient to run sevens with an auto, and would have a fun, good setup that way. But the more that I sat and thought about it, and this is when my buddy Sean was still working with me, we realized that the big holdup was a torque converter and trying to get a converter that would work, small displacement, big turbo, all of that. And one day Sean and I were sitting there and went, you know what, I wonder, let's see if Don has the information about the converter that he used with this turbo. And he did have the information. So the gears started turning in both of our heads, and we went, you know what, we can probably make the turbo work, so screw it, let's go ahead and use it. I already have the turbo, so let's see what can happen with it. And down the rabbit hole I went. So putting that turbo on the car quickly went from just putting that turbo on the car to I want to build everything I possibly can on the setup myself. And in doing so, I didn't want to work with the same materials and the same things that I had previously. So I started down the path of building an Inconel header. Sean and I built the titanium fender exit that's on the car currently right now with it being in race mode. I had to learn how to build a surge tank fuel system, an intake manifold with 12 injectors, a nitrous system, how to work with automatic transmissions, torque converter spacing. We built a 25.5 cage. Everything on the car, there's almost nothing that hasn't been modified on it aside from portions of the unibody at this point in time. But this turbo system, initially it was going full race car, big air-to-water intercooler, all of that. I then changed my mind, realizing that the class that I was pursuing, which would have been X275 versus Hot Rod at World Cup, those guys have gotten so fast now that aside from throwing tens of thousands of dollars more at this car, it won't be really competitive in that class. But I was already too far down the rabbit hole with it, and audibled to making it kind of a weird gray area between street car and race car. And now it's this weird Frankenstein thing, but something that I've had a lot of fun with and learned a lot. And I think that's the main reason that I put it on this list, is just the amount that I've learned in building this setup. Learning how turbo systems work, how it's something as simple as how am I going to tension the alternator on this thing, and having to come up with solutions to all of those problems. It's been one of the best experiences from a problem-solving and pre-planning perspective. There's some alliteration for you. But from that perspective, having to design and kind of ad hoc engineer a bunch of things to work on this car, and figuring out where the best locations to put different components were and have been. It's been a really cool experience, and I've learned a whole lot and continue to learn a whole lot from it. sure exactly where the car is going to go from here. I'm certainly not getting rid of it, and unfortunately trying to make a pass with it before the end of 2023. I think that ship has sailed, as my truck has started having issues now that need to be resolved prior to hooking a trailer up and going on a long drive with it so I don't get stranded somewhere. But come next year, 2024, be able to go out and make a hit with it finally after a long rebuild process. As I think I mentioned it before, but it took from the end of 2016 until it would have been mid-2022 to get the thing up and operational again. So an almost 6-year, just rounded up, called a 6-year rebuild process. It was pretty crazy, pretty intensive, and now it's finally up and running. And going into this winter, I'll try not to tear the entire thing apart, but there are some other things that I want to do with it, and we'll cross those bridges when we come to them in the upcoming months. And finally, we have arrived at number 1 on this list. And I didn't really have to think a whole lot about this, as this car, it is always kind of shot forward in my mind of being the favorite turbo system that I've built, at least to date at this point in time, and that is Jared's SRT4. So when I took this project on, I had built the previous turbo system for Jared's car, and this is the blue SRT4 that you guys have seen, who've been around the channel for any period of time. I did a build series on it a few months or a year or so ago. But the initial turbo system on this car, it was a normal factory SRT4 head, one of my T4 twin scroll top mount manifolds, hood exit exhaust components, aluminum intercooler tubes, so on and so forth. A fairly straightforward SRT4 turbo system with a big turbo, and the car went a good number. I think it went a mid to bottom 9. Now, after Jared got through with that system, or that setup, and wanted to do something a little bit crazier, he put a 420A cylinder head on it, which puts the exhaust, rather than being on the firewall side, puts it on the leading side, of the front side of the car, similar to like a Honda B Series or something along those lines. And that necessitated a whole new turbo system and what have you. And we sat and talked about it a bit, and eventually came up with a game plan of Jared put the turbo where he wanted it, and I essentially had artistic liberty to do whatever I wanted with it from there. And there began my favorite turbo system that I've built to date. And we went with a 321 stainless tube header for it. Dual slip collectors, all the good stuff that way. This was the first time I paid a whole lot of attention to symmetry and trying to make things look really beautiful and look really nice. And it sounds bad to say, but many times in the past it was more so you place the turbo in the location that it can go, and then you build around that, trying your best to make it look pretty and everything else. But this is the one where I had almost unlimited space as to where I could put things, and decided to make this really cool, really nice tube header for the car. And twin 44, I think they're Turbo Smart 45 millimeter wastegates on it. I did a titanium hood exit exhaust and wastegate dump tubes. I located I think it's a big Speed Factory Sport front wheel drive intercooler that he has for it, as well as one of Speed Factory's little tiny drag radiators. I made a cooling module that way between those things. Got everything mounted, an aluminum intercooler tube, or aluminum intercooler. Yeah, it is one tube because the turbo feeds directly into the other side, the hot side of the intercooler. Built an aluminum intercooler tube for it, and this setup all together, it's just, I'm looking at the finished photo of it now, I just absolutely love the way that everything came together, the way that everything laid out in the engine bay. And I wanted this thing to be just something beautiful when you pop the hood, and look crazy but be functional and everything else at the same time. And this is one that I'll be forever happy that is a portion of my resume, or a part of my resume, and just really happy with the way that this setup came out. And I think that the car at this point in time has now been on the dyno. I don't recall what it has made, but he's kind of in the same boat that I am, where I think that he wanted to make it hit before the end of this year, and just hasn't been able to make that happen between scheduling and trying to get the car working and work out bugs and everything else. But I look forward to probably at the beginning of the 2024 season going out with him, with Sean and Bob and all of my other buddies, and getting these cars that we've spent so much time and money getting together and learning all these different systems and making our creations operational, finally getting them out and getting to enjoy them, and making some hits with friends and being at the track with friends. That's kind of what this is all about. So I'm really thankful to have had the opportunity to work on this setup for Jared, and for that matter for all of the cars that have been on this list. And it was difficult to narrow it down just to the top 5, as there's been so many other cool turbo systems that I've been a part of, whether it be Bob's big single turbo setup on his Camaro, where we mounted a 106 millimeter turbo right dead center in the mouth of the front bumper, to the different streetcar Honda setups that I've built over the years, to my buddy Aaron's crazy streetcar Supra setup, to all kinds of other stuff. I don't do a whole lot of custom work any longer, but I do have a fairly rich history of doing that type of work, and I've built some pretty cool stuff, or been involved with some pretty cool projects over the years. And if you guys want to see any more of them, if you go on the BPA Facebook page, which should be linked, if you go on the About section on the channel here, you can click on the BPA Facebook page and browse through all the different photos, and it's everything from the beginning of running BPA up to this point now. And you can see all the manifolds, and there's a ton of manifold photos, and then as you go back farther, you can see some of the turbo systems. And there's been a bunch of different ones, and I've been really quite lucky and quite privileged to have the opportunity to work on and build all the stuff that I have over the years. But without rambling on forever, that's the top 5, at least at this point in time, as of November 12th, 2023. Those are the top 5 turbo systems that I've built to this point in time. So that list may change as time goes on, and if it does, maybe I'll do a second volume of this if I have anything else cool that comes up in the future. But without rambling on, that will be it for this one. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all these different journeys with me, and in this instance, a little trip down memory lane. All this stuff is cool, and I can't wait to get back to actually working on car stuff at this point in time. Now, we still have a little bit of work to do on the shop and on the new structures, but that will be coming up in the next episode with some pretty big updates on that. And I look forward to the next installment of the shop build series. But we'll get there in next week's video. And don't forget that I also have my Black Friday sale coming up from November 24th through November 27th. So I guess at this point in time, I can talk about what the sale will be comprised of. That'll be 25% off. Yes, 1/4 of retail price off all the manifolds that I have in stock. And I have SRT4 manifolds, 2JZ manifolds, Evo 10 manifolds, all that stuff is in stock and ready to ship, and it'll be available for not just the best price of the year, but my best prices ever on these manifolds, and the highest percentage discount that I've ever offered at this point in time. So have that to look forward to. Like I said, the 24th through the 27th of November. Don't miss out, as once these manifolds are gone, they are gone, and we'll have to wait until I can get everything restocked and rebuilt from there. But that is upcoming, and I will release in the next, or I'll release when the sale goes live, the discount code and everything else that you guys will apply to that to get sale pricing and all of that. But with that being said, that will be the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, and I will see you guys in the next episode.